Hi, my name is Kimberly Fitzgerald. I'm the Historic Preservation Officer for the City of Salem in Oregon, and I am in my first term at Adams State working toward my Cultural Resources Management degree. This is a presentation about historic survey in Oregon's local jurisdictions. Historic survey is one of several responsibilities of local governments who have been certified by the National Park Service. The City of Salem has been a CLG since 1986. And Salem has received about $250,000 in funds through the CLG program. The City of Salem gets audited by the State Historic Preservation Office every 4 years to ensure that it meets the required performance standards established by the National Park Service and the SHPO. The responsibilities include compliance activities like having a qualified landmarks commission and enforcing preservation legislation and ordinances. So additional responsibilities include education activities like training the Landmarks Commission and educating the public about historic preservation. Historic survey is one of the CLG's responsibilities. So what is historic survey? Well, it's not a questionnaire. Historic survey is actually defined as an inventory of properties that are at least 45 years old and retain reasonable architectural integrity. Historic surveys are often used as planning tools as part of redevelopment activities or community plan updates. So there's two kinds of survey. So RLS survey, which is reconnaissance level survey and also known as windshield survey, is a quick type of survey where resources are photographed and the material and style are recorded. Then there's ILS survey, which is intensive level survey, where detailed information on a plan or the interior is recorded and additional historic research is done. So great. Now we know that it's a responsibility of the local certified local government. We know what it is, so we can get to work. We forgot that property owners oftentimes won't want us to survey their property. And oftentimes they'll get quite upset if they don't understand why you're looking at their property, you're photographing it, and that sort of thing. So let's try and look at why that might be. So the first exercise I'd like to do as part of this is I'm going to ask you why you think a property owner wouldn't want their property surveyed. So think about that for just a second, and then I'll give you some responses that were shared a couple weeks ago when I did this presentation at the University of Oregon. So some of the responses, survey leads to designation and regulation, and property owners don't want to be regulated. You can see there's a newspaper article clipping here from here in Salem where property owners Lola and Christopher Hackett actually did say they think that they're owning a historic house was actually something that was a bit of a burden. They don't want anybody telling them what to do with their property. They think they know what's best, so they don't really want anybody from the government coming and looking at their property, and then it relates very closely to the first one. And then they're concerned that their property taxes will go up because, again, the government is looking at what they're doing. And then the ultimate paranoid response was, I think you're casing the joint and you're going to come back later and rob me. This is actually an interesting one. In Oregon, one of the requirements of being on special assessment, which is a statewide tax benefit, was that you had to open your house once a year to the public so that the public could walk through and take a look at your cool house. Well, recently that requirement was removed by the state legislature because of this kind of paranoia. So yeah, people were worried that the public was coming in and checking it out and that they were going to come back later and rob them. Okay, so how did we get here? We do have to listen to them, and you can't just go ahead and do the survey over the owner's objection here in Oregon. So let's try and understand a little bit about the planning and preservation laws here in the state so that we can better make a plan for how to respond to it. So planning and preservation in Oregon actually began in the 1970s with the adoption of Goal 5 by the legislature. So Goal 5 was part of a larger series of goals established by the legislature and put forth by the Land Conservation and Development Commission. So Goal 5 related to natural resources and historic resources. So it described how cities and counties were to do the initial inventories. That's when a lot of the first survey was done, and that they were supposed to take that survey and inventory and then use it to develop a larger plan for preservation of those resources in their community. So very cool goal. Well, about 20 years later, in 1995, in response to property owners who were upset about this regulation, the legislature adopted ORS 197772, which stated that the local government should allow a property owner to refuse to consent to any form of historic property designation at any point during the designation process. So here it is. Here's our smoking gun, as it were. We now have a legal responsibility at the local government to allow property owners to object. So that angry fellow we saw earlier, well, we have to listen to him. So what does that mean? Well, we can't just not survey, so we have to figure out how we convince owners to consent to survey. So let's look and see what sort of tools we have at our disposal that could help us. So could city planning help us? So what is city planning? Planning is a tool. It's a tool that's used to control and manage the construction and growth of a city or a town. And interestingly enough, this owner objection doesn't apply to zoning, so just to historic preservation. Zoning is used to define primarily where different kind of uses can be located. Design standards are usually part of a zoning code, and they are tools that can be used within certain kinds of zones, like a conservation overlay district that regulates design. The Secretary of the Interior standards are often used as a basis for design standards in local jurisdictions. And this kind of goes back to, in the history of planning in the late 1800s, the City Beautiful movement, which championed beautiful, well-planned cities. So one tool we could use to respond to owners is this planning tool. Survey can help us know what kind of resources we have and help us to plan our cities in a better way to help keep them beautiful. And what about historic preservation advocates? Can they help us? Well, historic preservation advocacy in the United States followed two paths, really, a private and a public one. The private sector really revolved around saving buildings that belonged to well-known historic figures. And while the government, on the other hand, worked hard to preserve natural features and natural parks. That's why most state historic preservation offices are in the state parks offices. I know ours is here in Oregon. But let's look more at the private side of things, because that's where our owner consent issues really lie. So on the private side, the first preservation advocacy efforts were in 1816 to save Independence Hall, and soon after the Mount Vernon Ladies Association, where they worked to save Mount Vernon in 1853. And their basis was patriotism, I think, at that point in time. They were really sharing with the public that these buildings were important to our country's patriotic history. And the National Park Service actually has a current program called This Place Matters. So that kind of viewpoint might be able to help us by answering that so what question. Why is it important to the community? Why does it matter? So that's a tool that could potentially help us. So it seems like in order to answer the question that angry property owner has, you want to be able to explain how you're going to use the survey results so you can be a bit reassuring. So that gets at one of the other responsibilities of the certified local government, which is education. The CLG seeks to educate the public regarding historic preservation in the community. So let's talk a little bit more about that. What kind of things could we do? So here in Salem, some of the things we've done with our survey data include historic markers. So remember, historic survey is about collecting pictures and some basic information about properties. And then the ILS, the intensive level survey, is doing more research. So you can take the information that you've collected and put it on a marker and look at that property owner. He's super happy to get that marker and put it on his building. Another thing we've done here is wayfinding signs. So these are all around town, and you can see some of the historic pictures, and we've got some interesting history included there as well. And another thing you could do is make walking tours. So for visitors, we in Salem, it's a college town, it's a Willamette University, so we often have folks coming from all over, and they want something to do while they're visiting, so walking tours is something they could do. So another key tool or strategy that we found that works well here in Salem is to begin by working with the neighborhood, so that you're not just working with one owner at a time and telling that same story over and over, just single one at a time. It helps to work with a group of people who already care about what happens to their neighborhood. Here in Salem, we have quite a few neighborhood associations that are very active in their community. So we recently created the Salem Heritage Neighborhood Program, where we work intensively with one neighborhood a year. And we don't just do one thing. We do historic survey, and then we use that survey to do some fun projects that help them celebrate their history. So you can see here, we created a Grant neighborhood calendar, and we got an artist to help us with that, and the neighborhood loved that. It featured pictures of their houses. We also did an architectural handbook and that kind of thing, so it was really fun. So I'm going to wrap up this presentation with a final exercise. So now that I've gone through the issues at hand, I want you to think about what are some of the benefits of historic survey. What would you say to that angry homeowner? You think about that for a second, and then I'll wrap up. So you could say the survey could be used as a planning tool to help keep their neighborhood beautiful. They could use their history of their house to help tell their community history through wayfinding signs and markers and that sort of thing. And understanding the history of their house can help make it more valuable. So those are all things that you could tell that homeowner. So in conclusion, successful local historic survey, the key is communication, communicating the value of survey and sharing with the neighborhood and the property owners the potential uses of that survey data and involving them in figuring out how they can be used and really bringing home why this place matters. So thank you for listening today, and if you have more questions, you can contact me at kfitzgerald@cityofsalem.net.